back on Fatama now. It's one of our 135s. I hope to fly on those things when I get back from Korea quite a bit. They go to Philippines and Singapore and different places. He must have just landed.
Okinawa, a subtropical island approximately one-half the size of King County, has warm humid summers and mild cloudy winters, but rains year-round and has warm waters year-round. These warm waters cause typhoons, hurricanes in the Pacific, and generally speaking are more intense than what we have in the US, since as an island, Okinawa does not have much land to slow typhoon down. To combat this, we have square concrete buildings with steel doors and window frames. These buildings were influenced by the US military occupation, and the closer you get to the base, the more of these you will see. And on the topic of bases, Okinawa has the highest concentration of bases in the Pacific, holding 60% of all Japan's US military bases, and land-wise only being 1% of total Japanese land. Notable noise pollution comes from these bases, and fighter jets, Ospreys, and other helicopters and fixed-wing planes deploy from these. Presently, civilians, being the Okinawans, not the Japanese, protest the bases being on Okinawa, and movement to Guam, Australia, and even Korea has been speculated by the media. This is where Okinawa is currently, but how and why is it here, and how does the US military occupation affect the development of Okinawa? To answer this question, we have to understand what was happening before the Americans came and after. Pre-1945. Okinawans, who were primarily consisted of poor farmers at the time, lived a very primitive and simple lifestyle. They farmed sweet potatoes and sugar canes for the mainland Japan and had no machines or advanced technology to do said farming. This is due to a mindset that looked back for answers rather than finding and creating new ways to solve problems. This caused severe technological and cultural, along with economic stagnation. 1945 Battle of Okinawa. General Ushijima of the Imperial Japanese Force on Okinawa understood that belief in the emperor does not win battles, tactical might does. He also understood that Japan was losing the war and the sole purpose of Okinawa was to buy time for the preparation of Japanese invasion. He devised plans that would, although be untraditional and even considered inhumane, but statistically speaking, would yield less deaths and more successful hits on US forces. He would deploy mass kamikaze attacks, suicide boats, and nighttime attacks, along with the already pre-existing bunkers, tunnels, and underground pillboxes. He would use his 100,000 men to their fullest potential and waste no lives feeding the American might. On the other side of the board, the US had three objectives when taking Okinawa. Capture the airstrips, keep as many civilians alive, and control the island. Capturing airships, specifically the one in Naha, was the main objective, but Yontan Airfield was just as important. Controlling the island went hand in hand with taking the airships, but came with the challenge of having to distinguish between Imperial combatant and Okinawan civilian. Many civilians would approach at night time, and they would attempt to be as quiet as possible when moving around, just as a Japanese raiding group would. It did not help that Okinawans did not know that one could surrender with a white flag. As the days dragged on and US forces fought for every foot of the island with machine guns, hand grenades, and mortars, they took control of the keystone of the Pacific. This would be the very beginning of what seems to be permanent US presence on the rock. After the US had now officially occupied and controlled Okinawa, they implemented their own foundation and infrastructure to help aid the construction of military bases on the island. From here forth, the Okinawan people are no longer part of the Japanese administration, are required to adopt US dollars, drive on the right side of the road, and US military vehicles had the right of way. Not being part of the Japanese administration meant they are no longer citizens in Japan or citizens of the US, and hence had no national flag, which meant in order to leave the island to go anywhere, you would require a passport. 1946 through 1960s. Immediately after the Americans had full control of Okinawa, they had begun to build Highway 58 and turn airships into airfields and airfields into air bases. They would employ Okinawa locals to construct these bases and roads to teach them valuable trade skills and knowledge needed to jumpstart the economy. This would also save Americans back home lots of taxpayer dollars. Those who wanted to learn more advanced trades, such as something medical or law-based, could apply for Shudan Shushuk. With this, one could go to a college for free as long as they came back to improve what they had in Okinawa. (1960s through 70). The next decade boomed for the island. The economy had taken off not only due to buildings being built everywhere the previous cities had fallen, but around the bases, businessmen and shopkeepers began setting up tattoo parlors, restaurants, souvenir shops, bars, and other businesses tailored toward U.S. service members and their needs. This grew even greater once the Korean War began, and absolutely massive once Vietnam broke out. Okinawa would be vital to the Vietnam War effort due to the fact that anything that had to get to Vietnam had to fly in through Okinawa. During this time, they were using B-52 bombers for daily bombing runs in Vietnam, which is only 1,330 miles away. These bombers were powered by 8 jet engines and caused tremendous amounts of noise, along with the existing rumors of nuclear warheads along with Agent Orange being sent over. Today we know at one point they had over 1,300 nuclear warheads on Okinawa, along with the Agent Orange being buried underground at the end of airstrips. This had caused the first feelings of negativity towards the Americans and their bases. 4 years after the Vietnam War began, a major typhoon blew through the Ryukyu Islands. This is Typhoon Sarah. Typhoon Sarah of 1959 would be powerful enough to completely level some of the pre-war homes and buildings and devastate all the farms on the island. After this, there would be another push for new, stronger buildings that can withstand all the weather on the island.
This truckload of bombs will soon be falling on Vietnam from a giant American B-52 bomber. The plane is taking off from Okinawa, a tiny Pacific island off the coast of Japan. Okinawa, captured from the Japanese in 1945, is still governed by America, the last piece of occupied territory from the Second World War still in Western hands. It's now the most important American military base in the world, but also the most threatened. For the Okinawans want to return to Japanese rule and get rid of the American base. They want the Yanks to go home. The pressure on the Okinawa base has grown with its build-up for the Vietnam War. 1/7 of the narrow island is covered by military bases, enough to blanket the Isle of Wight completely. The Korean War made Okinawa important. Vietnam made it vital. From Kadena Air Base, jet fighters patrol the coasts of Communist China and Korea. During the Pueblo crisis and the recent shooting down of the American spy plane, Okinawa was the base the Americans would have struck back from. It's to Okinawa that America sends her troops for Vietnam, on their way to the war or out of it.
Has it always been assumed that there was a lease, a time which the Americans would leave by, or has it always been assumed that it would go on forever?
No, I don't think so. Beginning with President Eisenhower, who stated that at some time in the future, when conditions permitted, Okinawa would revert to Japan. This has been restated by every president since President Eisenhower. However, there's been no timetable ever set on this.
You see here on car license plates, Okinawa, Keystone of the Pacific. Keystone gives the impression that once you pull that away, everything else tumbles to the ground. Are there any alternatives to Okinawa that you can think of?
Not that I know of. There's been, I've seen speculation, press speculation, that could possibly move this base to Korea, or perhaps back to Guam, or some other place. But there is no real alternative.
Okinawa is an island doomed by its position to be strategically important. Its value for America is that Communist China is only 500 miles away, the eastern part of Russia only 900 miles away, the troubled peninsula of Korea 600 miles away, and most important, Vietnam only 1,400 miles off.
1970 through 80. As the decades go on, Okinawa begins to look like what it is in its current state. Large cities down to the south, training facilities in the north, and air bases in the middle. But one thing is still notably different. The Americans have power. This will all change in 1972 when the US makes a deal with Japan and returns it to the Japanese administration, as long as the US can keep its bases and keep running them the way they previously had been. Once this took effect, many things changed. First of all, Okinawans are Japanese citizens and no longer need passports to fly to Japan. They had also adopted a Japanese flag. Secondly, Japanese elections that were untouched by the US had begun. Thirdly, drivers began driving on the left side of the road, and the military no longer has the right of way. US vehicles are phased out, with Japanese vehicles due to steering wheels having flopped sides. Fourthly, Japanese yen is adopted and US dollars are no longer primary currency. Exchange banks are built to accommodate this. Despite inevitably occurring, the treaty may have been enacted quicker by a single event known as the Koza Riot. The Koza Riot was a riot that spontaneously occurred and rapidly grew out of hand, resulting in over 1,600 Americans and 82 arrests. It began when a drunk service member hit an Okinawan, who was also drunk, with his vehicle, and taximen witnessed it. The taximen started yelling anti-American phrases despite the victim quite literally getting up and walking away, while MPs arrived in an attempt to extract the service member, but a crowd began to form. Another completely unrelated American and his girlfriend showed up to the scene and accidentally bumped an Okinawan vehicle. The crowd reacted by attempting to drag the two Americans out of their vehicle and beat them, but failed to do so, and instead decided to throw bricks and Molotovs at them. The MPs now rushed to help them and fired warning shots, which attracted a massive crowd that grew from 700 to a whopping 5,000. The crowd began pushing U.S. vehicles out of parking lots, which are identifiable by their yellow license plates, and flipping them over and setting them ablaze in the middle of the streets. They would eventually make their way into Kadena Air Base and ravage the Stars and Stripes publishing building along with the USO. The riot lasted 8 hours and went on to 7 o'clock in the morning.
コザ事件は覚えている？
コザ事件はね、なんていうか、あれは、なんていうのかね、沖縄の子供が暴行されたから、会社を、米軍の車をひっくり返して燃やしたものか？
と思うよ。
これは覚えてるから、そこのコザという町はすごい怖いっていうのがあった。で、夜は結婚していた時に旦那が一回だけコザの町を車でさーって通った時に沖縄の人と、それから、米兵っていうか、その軍人さんたちが集まる場所とか別々で、この軍人さんたちが集まる道路を走ったんだけど、すごい、威圧感というか、怖いっていう意識がやはり強かったね。事件ばっかり起こってるから、その怖いっていうイメージがもう本当にあった。